The black man pulled a white cup from a burning car. But when he got a call the next day, Jamal Carter stood at the edge of his small apartment's balcony, gazing out at the bustling streets of Chicago at 32. He felt like he was standing still while the world raced by. The cool autumn breeze ruffled his short, tightly coiled hair as he took a deep breath, trying to shake off the weight of another long day. Growing up on the South Side, Jamal had always dreamed of making a difference. His parents, both hard-working factory employees, had instilled in him a strong sense of community and the importance of education. Despite the challenges of his environment, Jamal had excelled in school, earning a scholarship to study social work at the University of Illinois. But life had a way of derailing even the best-laid plans. In his senior year, his father suffered a debilitating stroke, forcing Jamal to put his studies on hold to help support his family. What was meant to be a temporary break turned into years of working multiple jobs just to keep their heads above water. Now, nearly a decade later, Jamal found himself stuck in a dead-end job as a security guard at a local shopping center. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd wanted to protect and serve his community, and here he was watching over clearance racks and food court tables. His days were a blur of monotony, broken only by the occasional shoplifter or unruly teenager. At night, he'd return to his cramped apartment, too exhausted to do much more than heat up a microwave dinner and collapse into bed. The dreams of making a real impact, of being a force for positive change in his neighborhood, seemed to grow dimmer with each passing day. Yet beneath the weariness and frustration, a spark of that old idealism still burned. Jamal volunteered at the local community center on his rare days off, mentoring at-risk youth and organizing neighborhood cleanup efforts. It wasn't much, but it was something, a small way to give back and keep hope alive. As he stood on the balcony, Jamal's eyes drifted to the framed photo of his parents on the nearby wall, his father confined to a wheelchair, but smiling broadly, and his mother, her face etched with lines of worry, but eyes still full of love. They had sacrificed so much for him, and he was determined to make them proud. Even if the path forward wasn't clear, little did all know that fate was about to throw him a curveball, one that would test his character, challenge his beliefs, and potentially change the course of his life forever. As the city lights began to flicker on around him, he had no idea that in less than 24 hours, he would find himself at the center of a story that would captivate the nation and force him to confront his deepest fears and strongest convictions. The following evening, Jamal trudged home from another mind-numbing shift at the mall. The streets were unusually quiet, a light drizzle keeping most people indoors. He was lost in thought, mentally calculating whether he could afford to take a few classes at the community college this semester, when a deafening crash jolted him back to reality. 50 yards ahead, at the intersection of 79th and Halsted, two vehicles had collided with brutal force. A sleek black SUV had T-boned a police cruiser, sending it spinning across the rain-slicked asphalt. The cruiser came to rest against a streetlight, its front end crumpled like an accordion. For a split second, Jamal froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Then years of training and instinct kicked in. He sprinted toward the wreckage, pulling out his phone to dial 911 as he ran. "There's been a bad accident at 79th and Halsted." He panted to the dispatcher. "Police cruiser involved. Look serious. Send ambulances." As he approached the scene, Jamal could see that the SUV driver, a middle-aged woman, was dazed, but conscious bystanders were already helping her out of the vehicle. The police cruiser, however, was in much worse shape. Smoke billowed from under the crumpled hood, and Jamal could see flames beginning to lick at the edges of the metal inside. Slumped over the steering wheel was an officer, a white man in his early 40s, his face a mask of blood from a gash on his forehead. Jamal's mind raced. He knew the dangers of approaching in a burning vehicle, but he couldn't just stand by and watch a man burn to death. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. A black man from the South Side risking his life to save a white cop. But in that moment, none of that mattered. There was only a human being in desperate need of help. Taking a deep breath, Jamal rushed to the driver's side door. The handle was jammed, warped by the impact. He braced himself and pulled with all his might, feeling the muscles in his back rain with the effort. After what felt like an eternity, the door groaned open. The heat from the growing flames was intense, singing the hair on Jamal's arms. As he leaned into the vehicle, the officer was unconscious, his body limp and heavy. Jamal fumbled with the seatbelt, his fingers slipping on the mechanism slick with blood. Come on, come on. He muttered, acutely aware of the ticking clock. Finally, the belt released with a click. Jamal hooked his arms under the officer's armpits and began to pull. It was like trying to lift a sack of wet cement. The officer's dead weight, combined with the awkward angle, made progress agonizingly slow. Jamal's lungs burned from the acrid smoke filling the car's interior. He could hear the flames growing louder, feel the heat intensifying with each passing second. With a final desperate surge of strength, Jamal managed to drag the officer clear of the vehicle. They collapsed onto the wet pavement just as a gout of flame erupted from the cruiser's engine compartment. Jamal lay there for a moment, gasping for air, his body trembling from exertion and adrenaline. Then he remembered his first aid training and quickly rolled the officer onto his side, checking for breathing and a pulse. To his immense relief, both were present, though weak. In the distance, Jamal could hear the wail of approaching sirens. He stayed with the officer, using his own jacket to stem the bleeding from the head wound, murmuring words of encouragement, even though he wasn't sure the man could hear him, as the ambulances and fire trucks screeched onto the scene, bathing the intersection in pulsing red and blue light. Jamal finally allowed himself to process what had just happened. He had saved a life, not just any life, but that of a police officer in a city where relations between the black community and law enforcement were often strained. This felt like more than just a random act of heroism. It felt like a moment that could resonate far beyond this rain-soaked street corner. Little did Jamal know just how far-reaching the consequences of his actions would be, or how this single act of courage would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself, his community, and the complex tapestry of race relations in America. The next morning, Jamal awoke to find his phone buzzing incessantly. BL died and still sore from the previous night's exertions. He fumbled for the device, expecting to see a call from work, asking him to cover an extra shift. Instead, he was greeted by a barrage of notifications, missed calls, text messages, and social media alerts, all from unfamiliar numbers and accounts. Confused and slightly alarmed, Jamal sat up in bed and began scrolling through the messages. His eyes widened as he realized what was happening. Someone had captured his rescue of the police officer on video, and the footage had gone viral. Overnight, local news stations were clamoring for interviews. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like #HeroOfHead and Bridging the Gap. Even national outlets were picking up the story, framing it as a powerful moment of unity in a time of racial tension. As Jamal absorbed the sudden onslaught of attention, his phone rang again. This time it was a number he recognized, the Chicago Police Department. With a mix of trepidation and curiosity, he answered. Mr. Carter, a formal voice on the other end, inquired. This is Sergeant Williams from CPD. I'm calling on behalf of Superintendent Johnson. He'd like to meet with you this afternoon, if you're available. Jamal's mind read. The superintendent of police wanted to meet with him. This was unprecedented. He found himself agreeing to the meeting almost on autopilot, scribbling down the details as the sergeant provided them. As he hung up, Jamal's gaze fell on the framed photo of his parents. What would they think of all this? His father, who had always taught him to judge people by their actions, not their uniform or the color of their skin. His mother, who had worried every time he left the house, fearing an encounter with the wrong officer could end in tragedy. Jamal's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at his door. He opened it to find Mrs. Henderson, his elderly neighbor, standing there with tears in her eyes and a plate of still-warm cookies in her hands. "I saw what you did on the news, Jamal," she said, her voice quavering. "I always knew you were a good boy, but this is something else. You've made us all proud," as Mrs. Henderson enveloped him in a tight hug. Jamal felt a lump form in his throat. He had acted on instinct, doing what he believed was right without a second thought. But now, seeing the impact his actions were having on others, he began to understand that this was about more than just one man saving another. It was a symbol, a rallying point for a community desperate for hope and unity. Throughout the morning, more neighbors stopped by, each sharing their own stories of interactions with the police. Some positive, many negative. Jamal listened, struck by the complex tapestry of emotions and experiences that colored these relationships. As the time for his meeting with the superintendent approached, Jamal found himself at a crossroads. He had never sought the spotlight, never imagined himself as any kind of spokesperson or symbol, but now thrust into this unexpected role, he realized he had a unique opportunity and perhaps a responsibility to bridge the gap between his community and the police force that so many viewed with suspicion and fear. With a deep breath, Jamal stepped out of his apartment, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. He didn't know what the superintendent wanted or where this path would lead, but he was determined to use this moment to make the difference he had always dreamed of making. Jamal's meeting with Superintendent Johnson was nothing like he had expected. Instead of the formal, intimidating encounter he had anticipated, he found himself sitting across from a man who seemed genuinely moved by his actions. "Mr. Carter," the superintendent began, his voice warm but serious, "what you did last night, it's the kind of thing that restores faith in humanity. Officer Peterson is alive because of you, and we, the entire department, are deeply grateful." Jamal nodded, still somewhat overwhelmed by the situation. "I just did what anyone would do," he said softly. The superintendent leaned forward, his eyes intense. "But that's just it, Mr. Carter. Not everyone would have done what you did, especially not," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "especially not given the current climate between law enforcement and the black community." There was a moment of charged silence, as the unspoken tensions that had long simmered between the police and Jamal's neighborhood hung in the air. Then, to Jamal's surprise, the superintendent made an unexpected proposal. "We want to offer you a job, Mr. Carter, not as an officer, though that door is certainly open if you're interested, but as a community liaison. We need someone who can bridge the gap, someone who understands both sides. Your actions have given you a unique platform, and we believe you could make a real difference." Jamal sat back, stunned. This was the last thing he had expected when he walked into the office, a job offer, and not just any job, but a position that could potentially address the very issues he had longed to tackle for years. I I don't know what to say," Jamal stammered. "This is a lot to take in." The superintendent nodded understandingly. "Take some time to think about it. Talk to your family, your community. But I know this we're serious about making changes, and we believe you could be a key part of that process." As Jamal left the police headquarters, his mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. On one hand, this was an incredible opportunity, a chance to effect real change from within the system. He could be a voice for his community, advocating for better training, more accountability, and improved relations between the police and the people they served. But on the other hand, he couldn't ignore the potential backlash. How would his friends and neighbors react? Would they see him as a sellout, turning his back on years of justified anger and distrust? And what about the police force itself? Would they truly be open to the kind of sweeping changes needed? Or was this just a PR move to capitalize on a feel-good story? Over the next few days, Jamal grappled with the decision. He spoke with his parents, who were cautiously supportive but worried about the pressure he would face. He reached out to community leaders, some of whom saw the potential for positive change, while others warned him about the dangers of being co-opted by the system. Social media, which had initially celebrated him as a hero, now became a battleground of conflicting opinions. Some praised him for considering the position, seeing it as a step toward reconciliation. Others accused him of betraying the cause, of letting one good deed blind him to years of systemic injustice. The weight of the decision bore down on Jamal. He barely slept, spending long nights pacing his small apartment, trying to envision the potential outcomes of each choice. Could he really make a difference from inside the system? Or would he be more effective continuing his grassroots work in the community? Finally, after a week of soul-searching and heated debates with friends and mentors, Jamal made his decision. He would accept the position, but on his own term. He met with Superintendent Johnson again, this time armed with a list of conditions. He wanted regular town hall meetings between police and community members. He demanded input on training programs, especially those dealing with racial bias and de-escalation techniques. He insisted on transparency in investigations of officer misconduct, to Jamal's surprise and relief. The superintendent was receptive to his proposals. They spent hours hammering out the details, with Jam fighting for every concession he believed was necessary to effect real change. As news of Jamal's decision spread, the reactions were as mixed as he had feared. Some in his community embraced him, seeing his new role as a chance to have their voices heard at the highest levels. Others turned their backs, viewing him as a traitor who had been seduced by empty promises. Within the police department, the response was equally divided. Some officers welcomed the initiative, eager for a chance to improve community relations. Others resented Jamal's presence, seeing him as an outsider who didn't understand the realities of their job. Jamal knew the path ahead would be difficult. He would be walking a tight RPP, trying to balance the needs and expectations of two groups with a long history of mistrust and conflict. But as he prepared for his first day in his new role, he felt a glimmer of hope. He had been given a unique opportunity to be a bridge to facilitate the difficult conversations that needed to happen. It wouldn't be easy, and there would undoubtedly be setbacks along the way. But for the first time in years, Jamal felt like he was truly on the path to making the difference he had always dreamed of, with determination in his heart, and the support of those who believed in his vision. He stepped forward into his new role, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As Jamal settled into his new position as liaison, a secondary plot began to unfold, one that would test his resolve and further complicate his already delicate situation. Officer James Peterson, the cop Jamal had saved from the burning car, was finally well enough to return to light duty. Peterson had been following Jamal's story from his hospital bed, watching with a mix of gratitude and unease, as the man who saved his life became a lightning rod for the ongoing debate about police-community relations. Now back at the precinct, he found himself face to face with Jamal for the first time since the accident. Their first encounter was awkward, filled with unspoken tension. Peterson struggled to express his gratitude, the words catching in his throat as he extended his hand to Jamal. I owe you my life." He finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Jamal shook the officer's hand, noting the slight tremor in Peterson's grip. "I'm just glad you're okay," he replied, searching the other man's face for what understanding acceptance he wasn't sure. As the days passed, Jamal and Peterson found themselves crossing paths more frequently. At first, their interactions were stilted, limited to polite nods and brief exchanges, but gradually a tentative rapport began to develop. Peterson, it turned out, had his own complicated history with race and policing. Growing up in a predominantly white suburb, he had joined the force with idealistic notions of serving and protecting, but years on the job had left him jaded. His worldview shaped by the worst of what he saw on the streets one afternoon. As they shared a coffee in the precinct break room, Peterson confided in Jamal, "I've been thinking a lot about that night." He said, his eyes fixed on his cup. "Not just about you saving me, but about everything. The way I've been doing my job, the assumptions I've made." Jamal listened intently as Peterson opened up about the internal struggles he'd been facing. The officer spoke of the unconscious biases he was beginning to recognize in himself, the way certain calls made him tense up before he even arrived on the scene. This confession marked a turning point in their relationship. Jamal saw an opportunity to effect change on a personal level, to help one officer see beyond the badge and the skin color to the shared humanity beneath. As Jamal worked to build bridges between the community and the police force at large. LGE, he also dedicated time to working with Peterson. They had frank, often uncomfortable conversations about race privilege and the realities of life in different parts of the city. Peterson, for his part, began to see his job through new eyes. He started volunteering for community outreach programs, making an effort to connect with the people he served beyond just enforcing the law. However, this burgeoning friendship and Peterson's changing attitude didn't go unnoticed. Some of his fellow officers viewed his evolving perspective with suspicion, accusing him of going soft or drinking the Kool-Aid. Meanwhile, certain members of Jamal's community questioned his closeness with Peterson, seeing it as a betrayal of their cause. "How can you be friends with one of them, a young man?" asked Jamal after a tense community meeting. "Have you forgotten what they've done to us?" Jamal found himself caught in the middle, struggling to navigate the complex web of loyalties and expectations, as he believed in the power of individual transformation, in the idea that change could happen one person at a time, but he also understood the deep-seated pain and mistrust that fueled the skepticism on both sides. As the secondary plot unfolded, Jamal realized that his job wasn't just about broad policy changes or community programs. It was also about these small personal interactions, the slow, often painful process of breaking down barriers and building understanding one conversation at a time. The growing friendship between Jamal and Peterson became both a symbol of hope and a source of controversy, adding another layer of complexity to Jamal's already challenging role as he worked to balance these personal connections with his broader mission. Jamal found himself walking an increasingly fine line between two worlds that were still learning how to coexist as the weeks turned into months. Jamal's relationship with Officer Peterson continued to evolve, becoming a microcosm of the larger changes he was trying to implement within the police force and the community. Their conversations grew deeper, more nuanced. They began to share personal stories Jamal spoke of growing up on the south side, of the constant awareness of how others perceived him, of the talks his parents had given him about how to interact with the police. Peterson, in turn, opened up about his own background, his working-class upbringing, the uncle who had inspired him to become a cop, and the gradual disillusionment he had experienced on the job. These exchanges weren't always easy. There were moments of tension, of misunderstanding, of frustration on both sides. But there was also growth, a slow but steady expansion of perspective that began to influence how both men approached their work. One pivotal moment came during a ride-along that Jamal had organized as part of his community liaison program. He was paired with Peterson for a night shift, patrolling some of the city's most troubled neighborhoods. As they cruised the streets, Jamal noticed the way Peterson's demeanor changed as they entered different areas. The subtle tensing of his shoulders, the tightening of his grip on the steering wheel. "Talk to me," Jamal said quietly. "What's going through your mind right now?" Peterson was silent for a long moment, then sighed. I'm scared." He admitted the words, seeming to surprise even him. "Every time we turn a corner, I'm bracing for the worst, and I know that fear it affects how I react, how I treat people." This confession led to a long, honest discussion about fear, the fear that officers feel on the job, and the fear that community members, especially people of color, feel when confronted by the police. They talked about how these mutual fears fed into each other, creating a cycle of mistrust and aggression. As the night wore on, they responded to several calls together. Jamal watched as Peterson made a conscious effort to approach each situation with a more open mind, to listen more and assume less. It wasn't perfect, old habits die hard, but it was progress. The ride-along experience had a profound effect on both men. For Peterson, it was a chance to see his job through fresh eyes, to understand the impact of his actions in a new way. For Jamal, it deepened his understanding of the challenges officers face and the complexity of police-community relations. Their growing friendship didn't go unnoticed. Some of Peterson's colleagues began to show interest in Jamal's program, curious about the changes they saw in their fellow officer. Others remained skeptical, even hostile, viewing Peterson's evolving attitudes as a kind of betrayal, and Jamal's community reactions were similarly mixed. Some saw his friendship with Peterson as a positive step, a real-world example of the bridge-building Jamal had promised to do. Others viewed it with suspicion, questioning whether Jamal was being co-opted by the system he was supposed to be changing. Jamal's parents, initially wary of his new role, began to see the impact he was having. His father, in particular, found hope in the friendship between Jamal and Peterson. "This is how change happens," he told Jamal during a family dinner, "not just with big speeches and new laws, but with people learning to see each other as human beings." As their relationship deepened, Jamal and Peterson began to collaborate on initiatives that went beyond their official roles. They started a mentorship program, pairing officers with ultra-risk youth in the community. They organized basketball games between cops and community members, creating spaces for casual, positive interactions. These efforts weren't without challenges. There were setbacks, moments of frustration when it seemed like no progress was being made. But there were also breakthroughs, small moments of connection and understanding that gave both men hope for the future through it all. Jamal and Peterson's friendship became a testament to the power of open dialogue and genuine empathy. It wasn't always easy, and they didn't always agree, but their willingness to listen to each other, to challenge their own assumptions, and to find common ground became an inspiration to others in both the police force and the community. As they navigated this complex relationship, both men found themselves changing, growing, and reimagining what true community policing could look like. Their friendship, born out of a moment of crisis, was slowly but surely becoming a catalyst for broader change. 6 months into Jamal's tenure as community liaison, a critical incident thrust him and Officer Peterson into the spotlight, testing their friendship and the progress they had made. It began as a routine traffic stop office. Peterson pulled over a young black man for a broken taillight. The situation quickly escalated when the man, fearing for his safety, refused to exit. His vehicle backup was called, and within minutes, the scene had devolved into a tense standoff. Jamal, who happened to be nearby for a community meeting, received an urgent call from the precinct, recognizing the potential for disaster. He rushed to the scene, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. When he arrived, the situation was on a knife's edge. Several police cars surrounded the young man's vehicle. Officers, with hands on their weapons, shouting conflicting commands. The driver, visibly terrified, had his hands up but remained in the car, tears streaming down his face. Jamal assessed the scene quickly, his eyes locking with Peterson's. In that moment of silent communication, they both understood the gravity of what could happen next. Taking a deep breath, Jamal stepped forward, his hands raised to show he was unarmed. "Let me talk to him," he called out to the officers in charge. There was a moment of hesitation, then a curt nod of approval. Slowly, deliberately, Jamal approached the car. "My name is Jamal Carter," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm here to help. Can you tell me your name, Marcus?" Came the shaky reply. "Marcus Johnson. Please, I don't want to die. You're not going to die." Marcus, Jamal assured him. "I'm here to make sure everyone stays safe. Can you tell me what happened?" As Marcus began to speak, recounting his fear and the reasons for his actions. Jamal listened intently. He maintained eye contact, nodding, understanding, all while being acutely aware of the tension radiating from the officers behind him. Gradually, Marcus began to calm down. Jamal explained the situation, outlining what would happen next, promising to stay with him. Throughout the process, with gentle coaxing, he convinced Marcus to exit the vehicle as Marcus stepped out. Hands still raised, Jamal looked back at the officers. Peterson had holstered his weapon and was approaching slowly, his body language non-threatening. Following his lead, several other officers lowered their weapons. The arrest proceeded without further incident. As Marcus was placed in a police car, Jamal promised to follow up to ensure he was treated fairly. The young man nodded, a mix of gratitude and lingering fear in his eyes. In the aftermath, as the adrenaline subsided, Jamal and Peterson found a quiet moment amidst the chaos. "Thank you," Peterson said softly. "If you hadn't shown up," Jamal nodded, understanding the unspoken implications. "We did this together," he replied. "Your response, backing me up like that, it made all the difference." As they stood there, the flashing lights of police cars illuminating their faces. Both men realized that this incident would have far-reaching consequences. It would be scrutinized, analyzed, held up as an example of what could go right or wrong in police community interactions. For Jamal and Peterson, it was a vindication of their efforts, a real-world application of the understanding they had built. But it was also a stark reminder of how much work still needed to be done, how easily things could have gone differently. As news vans began to arrive at the scene, Jamal and Peterson exchanged a look of shared resolve. They knew that what came next would be crucial, not just for them, but for the future of police-community relations in their city. The real challenge was just beginning. In the days following the traffic stop incident, Jamal and Officer Peterson found themselves at the center of a media storm. The story had gone viral with video footage of Jamal's intervention, spreading rapidly across social media platforms. News outlets clamored for interviews, pundits debated the implications, and both the police department and community leaders scrambled to control the narrative. Jamal and Peterson knew they had a unique opportunity and responsibility to shape the conversation. They decided to face the public together, to use their experience as a catalyst for broader change. Their first joint press conference was a tense affair. As they stood side by side at the podium, Jamal could feel the weight of expectation from both sides. The room was packed with journalists, community activists, and police representatives, each group eyeing the unlikely pair with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Jamal spoke first, his voice steady despite his nerves. What happened that night was not a miracle, he began. It was the result of months of hard work, of difficult conversations, of a willingness on both sides to listen and to change. Officer Peterson and I are here today not as symbols, but as proof that understanding and cooperation between the police and the community is possible. Peterson stepped up next, his usual confidence tempered by humility. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have handled that situation the way I did, he admitted, working with Jamal, getting to know the community I serve. It's changed me. It's changed how I approach my job. As they fielded questions from the press, Jamal and Peterson presented a united front. They spoke candidly about the challenges they'd faced, the misconceptions they'd had to overcome on both sides. They outlined their vision for a new model of community policing, one based on mutual respect and open dialogue. However, not everyone was convinced. As the press conference wound down, a local activist stood up, anger evident in her voice. "How can you stand there and talk about progress?" she demanded. "One incident doesn't erase years of abuse and mistrust. How do we know this isn't just a PR stunt?" The room fell silent, all eyes on Jamal and Peterson. It was a critical moment, one that could easily derail everything they'd worked for. Jamal took a deep breath, then stepped forward. "You're right," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "One incident doesn't erase the past. We're not here to claim that all problems are solved. We're here to show that change is possible, that it's happening slowly but surely, but we need everyone's involvement to make it work." Peterson nodded, adding, "We're not asking for blind trust. We're asking for a chance to prove through consistent actions and transparency, that we're committed to doing better." Their response seemed to resonate with many in the room. But Jamal knew that words alone wouldn't be enough. In the weeks that followed, he and Peterson threw themselves into action, working tirelessly to implement real, tangible changes. They expanded the Ideal Along program, encouraging more officers to spend time in the Communities they served outside of regular patrols. They organized town hall meetings, creating spaces for honest, often uncomfortable conversations between police and community members. Jamal pushed for changes in police training protocols, advocating for increased focus on de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity. Peterson, leveraging his influence within the force, worked to get buy-in from his fellow officers, leading by example and challenging ingrained attitudes. Their efforts began to bear fruit. Slowly but steadily, incidents of police misconduct decreased. Community members was reported feeling more comfortable approaching officers, while officers found themselves better equipped to handle tense situations without resorting to force. But the path forward wasn't smooth. There were setbacks, instances of excessive force that threatened to undo their progress, community members who remained distrustful, officers who resisted the changes. Each incident was a stark reminder of how fragile their progress was, how easily old tensions could resurface. One particularly challenging moment came when an officer involved in their program was accused of racial profiling. The incident threatened to undermine everything Jamal and Peterson had worked for. Rather than getting defensive or trying to sweep it under the rug, they addressed it head on. They pushed for a transparent investigation, ensured that community representatives were involved in the process, and used the incident as a teaching moment within the force. It was a difficult period, but their commitment to accountability ultimately strengthened their credibility throughout it all. Jamal and Peterson's friendship deepened. They became each other's support system, offering encouragement during tough times and celebrating small victories together. Their bond, forged in the crucible of public scrutiny and shared purpose, became a powerful symbol of what was possible when people from different worlds came together with open minds and willing hearts. As the months passed, their work began to attract attention beyond their city. Other police departments reached out, interested in implementing similar programs. Community leaders from across the country sought Jamal's advice on building better relationships with local law enforcement, yet both men remain grounded, acutely aware of how much work still lay ahead. They knew that true lasting change would take years, perhaps generations. But as they looked back on how far they'd come, from a chance encounter at a burning car to a partnership that was reshaping their community, they felt a sense of cautious optimism. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Jamal and Peterson were committed to walking it together one step at a time. A year into their partnership, Jamal and Officer Peterson faced a pivotal moment that would redefine their mission and push their work in an unexpected direction. It began with a series of town hall meetings that Jamal and Peterson had organized across the city. These gatherings, designed to foster open dialogue between police and community members, had been largely successful. But as they sat in on their 10th such meeting, both men felt a growing sense of frustration. The same issues kept coming up: concerns about policing in minority neighborhoods, complaints about lack of economic opportunities, fears about youth gang involvement. It was clear that while their efforts had improved police-community relations, they were only scratching the surface of deeper systemic problems. As they debriefed after the meeting, Peterson turned to Jamal with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said slowly, "I'm starting to think we're treating the symptoms, not the disease." Jamal nodded, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "I've been feeling the same way. We're making progress. But it's not enough," Peterson finished. "We need to think bigger." Over the next few weeks, Jamal and Peterson engaged in intense discussions, brainstorming sessions that often stretched late into the night. They reached out to community leaders, social workers, educators, and fellow officers seeking input and ideas. What emerged was a bold new vision, a comprehensive community-based approach to public safety that went far beyond traditional policing. They proposed the creation of a task force that would bring together law enforcement, social services, education, and community organizations to address the root causes of crime and social unrest. Their plan included initiatives for youth mentorship programs, job training and placement services, mental health support, and community development projects. The police would play a crucial role, but as part of a larger ecosystem of support and intervention. When they presented their proposal to the police superintendent and city council, the response was mixed. Some were intrigued by the innovative approach, while others balked at the scope and potential cost of such a program. Jamal and Peterson knew they were taking a risk. This new direction would require them to step far outside their comfort zones to challenge entrenched systems and mindsets. But as they looked at each other, they saw the same determination reflected in each other's eyes. This was no longer just about improving police-community relations. It was about reimagining public safety and community well-being from the ground up. As they left the meeting, uncertain of what lay ahead, but committed to their vision, both men felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were no longer just a cop and a community liaison. They were becoming architects of change, embarking on a journey that would test their resolve, challenge their assumptions, and potentially transform their city. As Jamal and Peterson threw themselves into their ambitious new project, both men found themselves undergoing profound personal transformations. For Jamal, the journey had taken him far beyond anything he had imagined when he first pulled Officer Peterson from that burning car. He had gone from a disillusioned security guard to a key figure in reshaping his city's approach to public safety. The weight of this responsibility was often overwhelming, but it also filled him with a sense of purpose he had never known before. Late one night, as he pored over budget proposals and program outlines, Jamal caught his reflection in his apartment window. He barely recognized the man staring back at him, confident, determined, a far cry from the frustrated young man who had once felt trapped by circumstance. He thought back to the conversations he'd had with his parents over the past year. His father, once skeptical of Jamal's decision to work with the police, now spoke with pride about his son's achievements. His mother, though still worried about the pressures Jamal faced, had told him with tears in her eyes, "You're doing what we always hoped you would, making a real difference." Peterson, too, had undergone a remarkable evolution. The once jaded cop had become a passionate advocate for community-oriented policing and social justice. His fellow officers, who had initially viewed his friendship with Jamal with suspicion, now looked to him as a leader and innovator. One afternoon, as they walked through the neighborhood where they had first met under such dramatic circumstances, Peterson turned to Jamal with a rural smile. "You know," he said, "I used to think I knew what it meant to protect and serve. Now I realize I didn't have a clue." Jamal nodded, understanding the depth of what his friend was expressing. "We both learning," he replied. Every day their partnership, forged in a moment of crisis, had deepened into a profound friendship and a powerful alliance for change. They challenged each other, supported each other, and pushed each other to grow in ways neither had anticipated. But their journey had also come with costs. Both men had faced backlash from those resistant to change. Jamal had lost friends who accused him of selling out, while Peterson had been ostracized by some of his more traditional colleagues. The stress of their work took a toll on their personal lives, leading to missed family events and strained relationships. Yet despite these challenges, neither man regretted the path they had chosen. They saw the impact of their work in the small day-to-day interactions between police and community members. They saw it in the young people participating in their mentorship programs, in the decreased tension at community meetings, in the gradual but unmistakable shift in the city's atmosphere. As they stood together looking out over the neighborhood, they were working to transform. Jamal and Peterson reflected on how far they had come and the long road still ahead. They were no longer just individuals trying to make a difference. They had become symbols of what was possible when people reached across divides and worked together for change. Their growth, both personal and professional, was a testament to the power of open minds, courageous hearts, and unwavering commitment to a shared vision. As they faced the future and the challenges it would bring, both men felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unlikely friendship that had changed not only their lives, but the life of their entire community. As the sun set over Chicago, casting a warm glow across the city skyline, Jamal and Officer Peterson stood side by side on the balcony of the new community center. They had helped establish the building, once an abandoned warehouse, now bustled with activity, youth programs, job training classes, counseling services, and community meetings, all under one roof. This center was the physical embodiment of their vision, a testament to what could be achieved when a community came together with a shared purpose. It hadn't been an easy journey. There had been setbacks, resistance, and moments of doubt. But as they watched the people of all ages and backgrounds enter and exit the building, engaged in the work of building a better future, both men felt a profound sense of accomplishment. You know, Jamal said, breaking the comfortable silence, when I pulled you out of that car, I never imagined we'd end up here. Peterson chuckled, shaking his head. Life has a funny way of working out. Sometimes, he replied, one moment can change everything. As they reflected on their journey, the theme that had driven their work became crystal clear: the power of human connection to overcome barriers and create lasting change. Their story was proof that when people were willing to listen, to challenge their own assumptions, and to work together despite their differences, transformation was possible. The work was far from over. There would always be new challenges to face, new bridges to build, but as Jamal and Peterson looked out over their city, they knew that they had laid a foundation for a better future. One relationship, one conversation at a time. As the last rays of sunlight faded, Jamal turned to Peterson with a smile, ready for whatever comes next. He asked. Peterson nodded, his eyes filled with determination. All the way he replied, as long as we're in this together. They shared a firm handshake, a gesture that had come to symbolize so much more than a simple greeting. It was a renewal of their commitment, a promise to continue the work they had started. As they walked back into the community center, greeted by the sounds of laughter, earnest discussions, and the bustle of positive activity, both men felt a renewed sense of purpose. Their journey had shown them that change was possible, that the divisions that seemed insurmountable could be bridged with empathy, understanding, and persistent effort. The story of Jamal Carter and Officer James Peterson, from a chance encounter at a burning car to a partnership that transformed a city, would be told for years to come. It would serve as an inspiration, a reminder that even in the most challenging times, individuals have the power to make a difference. As they joined a group of young people eager to share their ideas for community improvement. Jamal and Peterson exchanged a knowing glance. They were no longer just a former security guard and a police officer. They were architects of change, builders of bridges, and living proof that when people come together with open hearts and minds, anything is possible. Their work would continue their impact, rippling out in ways they might never fully know. But in that moment, surrounded by the community they had helped to transform, Jamal and Peterson knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning.